Today we will be talking about satisfiability. So here what we will be determining is if a logical formula is satisfiable or unsatisfiable. Okay, so usually when we have to check satisfiability, our logical formula or the set of clauses are connected with conjunctions, which means the expression is in a CNF format. Okay, so if this CNF, if this expression is satisfiable, then the Boolean variables, the atomic propositions, can be assigned values. The value could be either true or false. So we can assign values to each of these variables such that the formula turns out to be true in the end. Okay, and unsatisfiable if not. For example, if we have something like, let's take this. If we have this example, so if how can we assign truth values, either true or false, to A and B in a way that this expression becomes true? Well, if we take that both A and B are false in this case, if both A and B are false, this gives true. This also gives true. T and T, yeah. All the clauses become true, therefore the expression is true. So we have to assign a truth value, which is false in this case, to the two atomic propositions in this case, such that the expression is true. Okay, so we have methods in which we can check satisfiability. So one thing is we can assign values and see how it goes, or we have approaches which we could take, which we'll be talking about in this discussion. One method is we draw a graph. Okay, we construct a graph and find out the values for the atomic propositions such that the expression becomes true. That's one method. Another method is we have something called the walk-sat approach. So there are a particular steps, there's a small algorithm, a few steps which we need to follow in order to check for satisfiability. Okay, so first let's look at this graph construction method. So here what we do is, what we do in the graph construction method is, when we are given a okay, right, so what we do in the graph construction method is, this is a normal graph. As you know, we have vertices and edges. So we draw the graph and try to define paths between the variables and assign either true or false to each of the variables. So let's take an example. Say you have a CNF like this. Okay, this is your CNF formula and you're supposed to check for satisfiability in this. Now, before we draw the graph, like we discussed yesterday, we are going to express each of the clauses in an implication format. Okay, if you remember, we said yesterday that these can be expressed in this format. The first clause, the second clause, it goes like this. The third clause is Z implies X because Z is the negated one, and here nobody is negated. Yeah, so we can express the graph in this way, clauses in this way as implications. Then before we draw the graph, what we do is we take the negated form of each of these implications. Negated as in we take the contrapositive form of each of the implications. Okay, so what we do is take the contraposition. Right? Okay, now these are the paths which you are going to draw in your graph. Okay, you're going to have nodes for each of the variable. You have a path for x, you have a path, you have a node for x, negation x, y, negation y, z and negation z. Right, so those are your nodes, and now you're going to draw your paths, your edges. Okay, so you have an edge from x to y, y to z, z to x, negation c to y. Okay, and then the other one, negation y to x, negation x, negation z to y, negation y, negation x to negation, and finally you have y to z. Okay, so this is your graph. Okay, now in this graph we talk about, in this graph construction methodology, once we draw the graph, there are two claims, like there are two facts. Okay, so the first one is, if your graph, if the graph G contains a path from variable alpha to beta, then there's a path from negation beta to negation alpha. So this is claim one, and that is what we do when we take the contraposition of each of the implications, right? So if there is a path like this, then there has to be a path like this. So that is the first one. Then the second one says, second one is more or less checking for satisfiability. It says that the formula that you express in this graph is not satisfiable. It is not satisfiable if the first condition is there's a path from x to negation x in the graph, and also there's a path from negation x to x. Okay, if there are these two paths in your graph, then the CNF formula which you considered first is not satisfiable. That is what the second claim says. So let's see how we can prove this claim. Okay, what is the way that you can prove it and say, okay, this is correct? So let's say that there's a path that you have a graph G. Okay, you have a graph G where you have a path from x to negation x and the other way around for some variable x in this graph. Okay, and also there exists an assignment, a predicate rather, there exists an assignment of values where you have x1, 2, 3 up to n for this particular formula. Let's say your CNF formula is given by capital A, so I'll say A. There's an assignment of values in A. Okay, so you have a graph which is drawn for the CNF formula A. There are two paths like this at the same time. There's an assignment of this sort that you can assign values for x. Okay, so let's take the first case here, where this arbitrary variable of yours which you took is true. Okay, if x is true, so there's an assignment of this sort where your x is going to be true. If that is the case, now how does this happen? Let's take the path x to negation x. Okay, so you have x, you have some other thing, you have several, you could have several other nodes. Okay, and let's take a node in the middle as alpha. Okay, and another node in the middle as beta in the path which takes you finally to negation x. So this is the path from x to negation x in your graph for the CNF formula A. Now you said that your x is true. Yeah. So if your x is true, that means the implication of x is true. Yeah. So which means then that is also going to be true. Likewise, it's going to be true, which means alpha is going to be true in this case. Yeah. Alpha is somebody who is in the middle of the path. But the thing is, if x is true, then negation x is going to be false. Yeah. And when you come back from that part of the path, what happens is, if you come backwards, you get that your beta is going to be false. Yeah. When you start from negation x, the rest of the implications is going to be false. But when you start from the beginning, it's going to be true. But this implication cannot exist. Yeah, where alpha is true and beta false, that implication cannot exist. Therefore, we say that there cannot be an assignment of values such that x is true and x contains a path from x to negation x. Yeah, since it results in an edge between alpha to beta, where alpha is true and beta is false. Consequently, the negation alpha or beta clause becomes false. Negation alpha or beta, that becomes false. Therefore, it contradicts our previous assumption saying that there's a satisfying assignment P x1, x2 up to xn for the CNF formula A, so that the formula is going to be true. Why? Because this cannot exist. Yeah. Now we did this for case 1, which is x is true. We can do the same thing when x is false as well. Then what will happen is you get an edge in the other way around. Again, what you can say is under case 2 that this cannot exist. Such an assignment of values cannot exist in the implication. Okay, so those are the two claims which come under this particular graph construction method. But that is not what we're going to do using this graph. Using the graph, what we're going to do is assign values and see if the CNF formula is satisfiable or not. Right? So let's see how we can do that. There's a few steps for that. What you first do is you construct your graph just like we did here. And then you pick a particular variable, for example, XO, YO, negation XO, negation YO, whatever it is, the node that you want to pick, you pick it. There shouldn't be a path whichever the node that you pick, that node should not have a path from itself to its negation. Okay, if there is a path like that, then we are not going to consider that. Eka halala, we are going to go to the next one. If the next one also has a path from y to its negation, then we are going to drop that as well. Okay, somehow or the other, we are going to pick a variable who doesn't have a path to its negation. Right? And whoever has that becomes true. That particular node becomes true. Right? Then we choose that node and check for reachability of the other nodes from this one. Directly reachable people. We check for directly reachable people and make them also true. We make it true. While the rest of the nodes which are not reachable become false. So if the graph is a complex graph, we might have to redo this process multiple times, picking a variable and assigning values multiple times so that we get the final set of values. Let's do an example and see how we can put this into practice. Let's say you have a CNF which is like this. By the way, when you have only two variables in your CNF that you're using for satisfiability, you call that a two-sat problem. Only two atomic propositions are available. Okay, now this is your CNF formula. Now what do? You have to construct the graph for this. If you are using the graph construction method, then you have to construct the graph. Or else you can use any other method that we'll be discussing later. So here you have the paths. And you have your contraposition. And now let's draw the X implies negation Y. Okay. X negation X, Y and negation Y. X to Y, Y to X, X to negation Y, negation Y to negation X, negation X to negation Y, Y to negation X. Okay, this is your graph drawn for this CNF. Okay, now what do? Since we have drawn the graph, now we are going to look for a atomic proposition. Out of these are the ones that we have. So we are going to look for a node out of these four who doesn't have a path from itself to its negation. So let's first choose X and see whether X has a path from X to negation X. We have X here. X to negation X, there is a path. You can go from here to here. Yeah. Since there is a path, we're not going to choose that. We are going to discard it. Then let's choose Y and see if there's a path. If you choose Y to negation Y, also there's a path like that. Therefore, we're not going to choose that as well. Then come to the next one. Negation X to X, there's no path. You can't go from negation x to its negation. Therefore, we pick that node. We pick this particular node, and that node is assigned the value. After that, what do? Whoever is reachable, whoever is directly reachable from this particular node that we chose is going to be assigned the same value. So the ones that are directly reachable from negation x is, this one is reachable. X and y are not directly reachable from negation x. Yeah. Therefore, what do? We assign the opposite value to those two. Now, what does this mean? What does this valuation mean? This valuation means that x is going to be true, x is going to be false and y is going to be false. This case, according to the graph, this case satisfies this CNF. Okay, that is the answer generated. So let's see if that is true. When when x and y are false, x and y false, this is true. Make up true. These are also true. So all are true. Therefore, this is a conjunction. This answer is true. Okay, so this is one method rather than just applying the values. This is one method, the graph construction method, where you can check for satisfiability of a given CNF formula. Okay, now there's a similar method to this method, another method, which we mentioned earlier as this walk-sat thing. Okay, that is called the walk-sat method. So what happens in this walk-sat method is, okay, now if you look at this, so your formula is in the CNF format. Okay, so you start by assigning truth values to all the literals. You can start by assigning true to all your positive literals. Okay, and you check if හැමෝම true nama, if your formula becomes satisfiable. What you do is you pick a particular clause that gets unsatisfied. Then හැමෝටම true දාගෙන ගියාම මොකක් හරි clause එක satisfy වෙන්නේ නැත්නම් you pick it. You pick that clause and ඒක ඇතුලේ තියෙන මොකක් හරි BOC හරි මොකක් හරි තියෙනවා නම් you pick one literal from that clause and ඒක අනිත් පැත්ත හරනවා. දැන් අපි අතර කලින් කියලා තිබ්බේ be true කියලා. Now we say be is false. And we again redo the previous step and check if the satisfaction happens in the formula. We pick a clause again and flip the variable. We do it. I mean, we redo it. Then make to make the number of times minimum, what we do is when you are picking a clause, when you're choosing a clause to pick a literal to flip it, we do it in a way such that it will result in the fewest previously satisfied clauses becoming unsatisfied. Let's do an example and see what it means. කලින් සැරේ satisfy වෙච්ච කට්ටිය වෙනස් වෙනවනේ අපි මෙහෙම flip කළාට පස්සේ. ඒ වෙනස් වීම අවම වෙන විදියට තමයි we are going to choose a literal. It's going to be complex. So let's try an example and see what happens in it. Then you have a formula like this. Okay, this is the formula. මොකද්ද මුලින්ම කරන්නේ? දැන් මේක CNF එකෙන්ද ඉන්නේ බලනවා. So this is in CNF. Okay, then your first part is you check if this is in the CNF format. Take a hurry. Then what do? You pick your literals and assign true to all of them. Then make A, B, C, D. No, there's no D. Okay, your A, B, and I didn't know. A, B, C, D, E. Everybody is true. Now assign this valuation to the literals and check if the CNF is true or not. Then we can true and then the method of false and therefore this is going to be method in a false. This becomes true. Make up true and make I false. Is a making hariyanne. So this gets unsatisfied here. Who are the unsatisfying clauses? The clauses who get unsatisfied is these two clauses in this case. Okay, right. Now you're supposed to pick a clause to choose a literal for flipping. Then may they can own a because these two are the unsatisfying ones. So which one are you going to pick? So if you choose negation C and flip it, are you going to choose negation C and flip it, or are you going to choose this one and flip it? Now, what was the condition? You do it in a way such that the previously satisfied clauses get unsatisfied in a minimum manner. And if we flip it, you notice that even this one who was satisfied before gets unsatisfied. Yeah, because C was the one who was holding it there. Therefore, I suggest to go with this clause. I'm going to try flipping B, the value of B, to the opposite one. Then what do? I'm going to repeat the this thing, the steps. Now A, C, D, E are true, but B is false. What happens? True. This also becomes true now. Yeah, that clause is also true. Then mama calling C this clause also becomes false, which is not advantageous for me because calling true with checkana again becomes unsatisfied. And now the only one who's false is the first one. Now what do? I choose that. Then I can choose kalata. It's not going to do me harm because it's not going to impact the other ones. Yeah, it does minimum impact, minimum negative impact. So next, what do? Unsatisfied when a negation C. Yeah, so I choose that and I make it false. Yeah, again I redo the steps. I again redo. I get my valuations. B and F are false now. Sorry, B and C. The rest is true. Again, once I do the top steps, I get that. This is also true. Yeah. Therefore, I can say, okay, then on the mage antima step whichever the step it is, that the entire clause is satisfied. Finally, what are the satisfying values? A, D, E all are true. B and C is false. In this valuation, the formula becomes satisfied. Okay, so we basically check if there is a monohari valuation so that the CNF finally becomes true. That is what we check in both these methods. So these are two methods in which you can do it. Then you have something called, not something called, you can do this in an automatic manner as well using certain applications, okay, which we will be discussing maybe in the next one or the week after. So you have two such programs. If you have time, just take a look at them. You have a platform called Spin, okay, which is an automatic prover. You can give a program, okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be a CNF formula like this. You can give a program with if statements or whiles or whatever, and it will check for satisfiability in that particular program. Now, the whole point of doing all this logic stuff during the past few weeks, we have been discussing logic and satisfiability and this and that. The whole point of doing all of this was to understand that you need that discrete part of a part of the what do you call context to check the satisfiability or the validity of a particular program, okay, and that is what happens in these platforms as well, right? So Spin is an automatic tool that you could use for such things. There are other platforms as well, but we'll be discussing about this one. And another manual method we'll be discussing is what I mentioned yesterday as well, Hologic. Okay, so here also we construct some type of a graph. Given a program, you will have a program now from next week onwards. Most probably we will not be dealing with these formulas. We'll be dealing with the small code fragments. So when you have something like that, you convert that into a formula for which you can draw a graph, and you draw it and then you check for satisfiability. ඔක තමයි මේකේ වෙන්නේ. එතකොට you'll have to learn a few rules. If statement එකක් තිබුණොත් මොකද්ද දාන rule එක? While එකක් තිබ්බොත් මොකද්ද දාන rule එක? There are a few rules that you need to use when you prove validity in Hologic. There's another technique that you will be learning about with respect to graph construction is DPLL. That is also an algorithm for satisfiability. Methanadi, here of course you don't draw a graph. Here you do draw a graph. And you check for parts and do the satisfiability. So those are things that we'll be discussing in the upcoming weeks. Let's go to the tute and see the question that we have there. Okay. So here you have several statements that have been given to you, and you're supposed to come up with the CNF and then draw the graph. So drawing the graph, of course, is okay because now you know how to do it. So in order to get the CNF formula, so you have several things. To get an executive job, it's necessary to be a graduate. There are two clauses, not clauses, prepositions here. You have get an executive job and you have being a graduate, right? So I said executive job is P and graduate is Q. So how do we define this in an implication? With an implication, I need to get an executive job, it's necessary to be a graduate. So what does this mean? Now, if you remember, we discussed you said that this can be written as P is sufficient for Q and Q is necessary for P. Yeah. Oh, කොහොමද කියවන්නේ? එතකොට what does this mean? Executive job එකක් ගන්න ඕනේ නම් it's necessary to be a graduate. So being a graduate, being a graduate is necessary to get a executive job. Executive and P, it's the same thing. Okay, it's P implies Q. So how do we read this? Necessary to be a graduate to get a executive job. Then B, it's sufficient to be a graduate to get an administrative job. Okay, being a graduate is sufficient. Then make a being a graduate is being a graduate is sufficient to get what job? An admin job. Right? Again, Q is enough for R. Yeah. Then if a person is not a university student, then he has to find his daily income. Okay. So if that person, that of course is very direct, if then, you don't have to look for anything. If he is not a graduate, then he has to find his daily income S. He's not. It's a not. Then the fourth one, if he is working, no, anyone who is working in an administration or executive job can find his daily income. Anyone who is working in an administration or administration or an executive job can find his daily income. Okay, so since you have your implications with you, now what you need to do is, like we did here, you take your implications, you take your negations, and then you just draw the graph and get the valuations and check if it's satisfiable or not. Okay, so most probably